Let's get a word from Peter Barnes, political strategist, who joins us to chat over the big stories of the day. Good afternoon to you, Peter.
Hi, Ian. How's it going? Nice to see you again.
It's all right. Yeah, not bad at all, thanks. Well, let's start with this story because, of course, it's dominating everything at the moment. Keir Starmer, ministers urging Keir Starmer to sack his chief of staff over these briefings that we were just talking about. Starmer is keeping his faith, apparently, in this McSweeney character. Environment Secretary Ed Miliband was speaking this morning on this, doing the rounds. He chatted to our station next door, Times Radio, about this very issue. Let's have a listen to what the Environment Secretary had to say.
I think it's been an unfortunate 2 days, to put it mildly. But, you know, these briefings happen. They're bad. I'm sure Keir's absolutely furious about it. And I tell you, though, the thing that sustains you in politics through these turbulence, and I have been around a long time, and I remember the Blair Brown briefings, which were actually far worse than this. And what sustains you through this turbulence is mission. Having a sense of mission, having a sense of values, knowing where you're going. And that's what this... And you know, my advice to my colleagues is stop looking inwards.
Stop looking inwards. Having a sense of values, Peter Barnes. What are those values?
Well, this is the thing. I think I've just agreed with Ed Miliband because he's 100% correct. But the Labour Party doesn't have any of the things that he's saying that they need, which is, like you said, values and mission, because they don't have anything. And this is why everything seems to be falling apart at the seams. Well, falling apart, really, because they got elected on the promise of change. Yeah. But change is not the destination. Change is how you get there. And unfortunately, they never really told us where we were going until they really got into power. And then they realized that they had even less of a clue then. What I find most interesting about this, the whole kind of Westminster drama, because this is kind of my bread and butter, I have to admit, I'm like, you know, past the popcorn. But what I will say is, people used to say that Boris Johnson's number 10 was, you know, was pandemonium and a circus and all of that. This situation makes Boris Johnson look like the smoothest prime minister ever. You know, like there's no scandal, no nothing. I think this actually might be worse than Partygate in a political sense, because what it's really highlighted is yet again the power of aides, the power of the unelected within, you know, our democratic institutions. Because Morgan McSweeney is a very powerful man, and nobody put him there. Nobody said, all right, you know, you could be the prime minister's number one guy. And it's quite concerning, really, the amount of power that he wields, because for me, I was listening to your opening monologue there, and I do agree with you, but my inner Westminster animal is saying to me, Morgan McSweeney did this deliberately to bolster Keir Starmer as the only option. Because if you think about it, what have we been talking about? Ed Miliband, Angela Rayner, you know, the nonsense of this deputy leadership contest that never seems to end. And, you know, they don't really have anybody else. And I think that was Morgan's plan, that realistically, he's trying to make the base of the Labour Party, which are fleeing to the Greens like you've never seen, you know, to make them stay put, because Keir's the best they're going to get. You know, he's doing the whole, you know, the grass isn't always greener line. And unfortunately, with the Green Party, it might just be a little bit greener, but you never know. But I have to admit, this has been very entertaining, but it is at the cost of real debate over real issues. The economy has melted away. We don't have one anymore, realistically. And, you know, we've got geopolitical crisis, we've got a crime crisis, the migrant crisis. You know, we can't seem to keep prisoners in prison, which I find quite interesting. We just seem to have revolving doors on the ones that we bothered to build about, what, 150 years ago.
Sure.
It is absolutely amazing to me how we get stuck on these issues because of the kind of drama of them, rather than realizing they are dead cats, and we should really just ignore them and start demanding more.
And I'm always intrigued by these characters like Morgan McSweeney, because if you look at his backstory, I mean, he's a Labour guy, came over from Ireland when he was a teenager, worked for the Labour Party, and that's kind of been his only real professional kind of area, I guess. And they sort of developed this kind of Svengali image which is completely misplaced. There's no reason for that. I mean, he's even got the right name that intrigues people. So this kind of brilliance is projected onto them, and then you have to stop once in a while and go, hang on a second, whoa. Just because he's got an unusual name and sounds a bit Dickensian, and someone who has been there a long time, that combination doesn't make him brilliant.
Oh, without a doubt. You know, we did it to Steve Hilton, we did it to Dominic Cummings, we did it to Alistair Campbell, you know, the original aide that got too big.
Yeah.
It is interesting how these characters, but I have to admit, Campbell's line was, you should never be the story, and if you are, you should resign. I mean, he didn't really follow his own advice till the very last minute, but maybe Morgan might take the hint. But I don't think he will, because Keir Starmer can't afford to lose him, because we're not living in Starmerism. We're living in Morgan McSweeneyism. Starmer's just a vessel, and it's Morgan McSweeney that's really guiding a lot of the decisions inside Number 10. He's dictating policy, he's dictating a lot of the messaging work, because they've had, I think 3 directors of communication walk out now. I mean, once they start to leave, trust me, I know a lot of these people, that's when, you know, the ship is beyond repair and is sinking. But I have to admit, I don't think he's going to go, because he should have gone over Peter Mandelson. He should have gone over the dodgy donor situation when he was running the Labour in group over the Brexit campaign. There's lots of reasons he should have gone, and Keir Starmer should have fired him, and he didn't then. No. So I'm not quite sure why he's going to now, when I actually think Starmer may have been in on this, and I do think this is rather part of the plan that's getting out of control.
Yeah, it's certainly getting out of control. Well, we're asking that question, who would replace him? We'll continue to take calls and comments on that. Also, this devastating story, Peter, the safeguarding review into the death of 10-year-old Sarah Sharif, found that neighbours, I mean, this is where we're at in this world, neighbours feared being branded racist if they raised concern about how she was being looked after. A council worker visited the wrong address 2 days before she died, and custody was granted to this man, her father, in 2019, despite abuse allegations. I mean, you really cannot imagine how so many things could have gone wrong, and this poor girl who lost her life to the most horrendous violence. Let's have a listen to Keir Starmer talking about this case.
My first response is a human response. This is just the most awful case. It's very hard to see and to read about for many people who will be viewing this. Just shocking. So that's where I start on this. Obviously, there's going to be questions that need to be answered in relation to this case. I don't think that we should allow ourselves to think that whatever the rules on smacking are, that that's got anything to do with this case. This is about violence, it's about abuse, it's about making sure there's protection safeguards for children, particularly those being homeschooled.
Well, this is very awful, and apologies for the grim detail on this, but Peter, you'll be familiar with what happened here. She was discovered in August 2023. She'd been beaten, burned, hooded and strangled. It was a catalogue of abuse that had gone on for a long time. Her short life was marred almost consistently by violence and abuse from her own father, and that in itself is bad enough. But when you begin to read the details of this and realise that there were possible, I know hindsight is very powerful, but there were possible points when maybe somebody could have stepped in, but multiple reasons as to why not, including neighbours scared to report their concerns.
Yeah, definitely. This case is horrific, and it just seems to get worse and worse and worse. Because one thing we have to remember, this is a systemic chain of failure. It's not little errors and little mistakes. This was a profound dropping of the ball like you've never seen, because there's a couple of elements really that you have to pick out on. One, I believe that the identity politics that has dominated our culture has played a role, if not the leading role, into why these situations keep happening. Because you say there that, you know, we can't imagine these kind of errors happening in other cases. Well, I give you the Southport attack, where Axel Ruda-Cabana was given to prevent 3 times to prevent these situations, and they failed. You know, we have to start accepting that the government institutions and the people running them are not fit for the office that they hold. And most importantly, why is it always kids at the moment? Why are we so incapable of protecting children, the most vulnerable people in our society that need us to be on our best game at all times? And we let them down again and again and again. But this hostile environment, this culture of being called a racist, can be parked very squarely at the door of the left, because that is who has been pushing this stuff. That is who has been saying, oh, you can't say that, and encouraging self-censorship, which is the most perverse bit of all of it, that we know something's wrong, but because we might get into trouble, we don't say anything, and bad things happen, and horrific things happen. We have to grow up, and I start to see it starting to abate a little bit, but not nearly fast enough when we look at the disaster of the grooming gangs inquiry. Yeah. Keir Starmer says that, yes, there'll be questions and we'll need answers, but we've got to implement things as well. I look at so many of the J report recommendations yet to be implemented. Why? This is my big question. We've got to start asking, what are you doing, in the day, rather than just pointing at something and saying that's terrible. That's not leadership, and we have to start demanding it.
Indeed. Absolutely bang on, Peter. Thank you. We'll talk more to Peter Barnes in just a couple of moments.